Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Sunday talk within the Nine Sided Circle. Just as we did last week, um, your two hosts are going to be interviewing each other. This time it's going to be Mushtaq's turn. And if you want to see my interview, you can check out one video back and you'll get to hear a lot more about me.
Yeah, we'll put up a link to it, up here somewhere at the end of this.
Yep. So, do we have any, YouTube spiel stuff we got to do?
Yes, we do. Shall I?
Go for it.
Please, please, please subscribe to our channel. We're desperate for subscriptions. Actually, we don't really care, but yeah, we would like you to subscribe.
Yeah, we really appreciate it when
Yeah.
you do. And everyone who has joined us so far, a lot of you are joining us live. Some of you will be joining us on the replay. Glad you're here. As always, thank you.
Yes, and if you look, I think down there, you will see the subscribe button and the little bell button, which if you push, you will get notified. And if you look down in the description, which is down here, you will see a link to our mailing list. If you want to get on our mailing list, we will send you occasional interesting things. We do not sell, bend, spindle, or mutilate your personal data. Nobody will ever know that you ever signed up on our mailing list. Um, and MailChimp claims that they don't sell it either, so you should be pretty safe. Um, and there's other fun things you can check out down there. Find us on social media, and that's like the biggest thing at the moment.
Yeah. Retreat's still going strong.
Yep.
Hey out there to everybody who's participating in that. We're about halfway through. And I'm doing good. How are you doing, Mish Talk?
I'm feeling pretty frisky.
Yeah,
Yep.
good, because you get to do a lot of the talking tonight.
Damn.
Hmm. So, what do you think? Should we get started?
Let's get started.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I, one of your hosts, Noor, am going to be interviewing your other host,
That
Mushtaq,
would be
this
me.
evening. Yep. And let's start with our first question. So, I would love to know, and I'd love for you to share with everyone, where did you grow up? What was that home environment like?
I was born and raised in southeastern New Mexico. The nearest town to my home was a tiny little place up in the mountains called Ruidoso. And I lived on a small ranch outside of Ruidoso. And I lived there with my mother, my father until he passed away, two sets of aunts and uncles, and my father's parents, my grandparents on that side. And yeah, up until I was 13. So that was where I was born, and I still have a strong connection to the area. Last time I was there was, God, almost 3 years ago now. Barely recognizable, especially since the casino went in.
So, at that point, when you moved, where did you end up?
I
You and
ended
your
up
family?
on the central coast of California. The place where I was born had the distinction of being the first place ever to have a nuclear bomb dropped on it. People don't realize this, that the first nuclear bomb was dropped on Trinity site, which is right near White Sands, which is just over the hill from where I grew up. Consequently, though the government doesn't mention this, there's a whole lot of, like, especially back then, cancer and birth defects. And two of my younger brothers and sisters were autistic, and one was born with severe cerebral palsy. And so about the time I was 13, we moved out to California for a number of reasons, but one of the biggest was that so my younger brother could get some services, and the only place that he could get any services was at Vandenberg Air Force Base. They had a special ed school there. This was back in the 1950s, where if you were somebody who was born with severe cerebral palsy, you could expect to spend your whole life in an institution. But my family wasn't having with that. So we found a place where he could get the services that he needed, the medical help that he needed, without being institutionalized.
Yeah, so that was a lot, even
Yeah.
for, for a child and for a family to handle. So, how do you think you initially became interested in spirituality?
Well, that goes back to my family, which was
Mm.
a very spiritual family. I was sort of raised in the spiritual traditions of the area. So it kind of uh, got in by osmosis. And so I can't remember Gesundheit.
Thank you.
Can't remember a time when I wasn't interested in that sort of thing.
So, as a result, then, you did a lot of uh, exploring of some kind or another,
Yeah.
and eventually you became interested in Islam and Sufism. How did that evolve? How did that come to be?
Well, so when we moved out to California, um, pretty much the first kid I ever met out here was this Filipino kid. And that area where we moved to had a big Filipino community, but he was not uh, from Manila and the Central Islands. His family was from the South, and they were Muslims. And this kid became probably my best friend uh, for a number of years, for a very long time. Um, and he had just lost his mother. And so we had things that we could bond about. And we ended up studying martial arts together. And his father became our instructor, teaching us the family art, as it were. And so I got exposed to Islam uh, back when it wasn't a thing, when, people knew that there were these people called Muslims, but they didn't know anything about them other than maybe they wore turbans or something. Uh, but yeah, I spent a lot of time at that house, and I was used to people praying 5 times a day, and I understood what Ramadan was, and I even kept Ramadan when I was 15. It was the first time I ever kept Ramadan, and I wasn't even a Muslim. I just wanted to support my friend.
Yeah, we used to do that with our friend Miriam as well.
Yeah.
Long before any of us were thinking about the nuances of religion and stuff. It was like, this is my friend. She doesn't get to eat lunch, so I won't eat lunch either. Yeah. And um, I'm sure you learned a lot through that experience as well.
Oh yeah. I learned things like Muslims have really good families. They
Mm.
have strong family ties. Uh, and they're really nice people. So my experience with Islam had nothing to do with terrorists and all of
Right.
that kind of stuff. That wasn't even a thing back then.
That was long before that was a thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that was back when Afghanistan was this modern society where people dressed in like Western clothes and women went to school and all of that kind of stuff.
So you guys didn't even really have the experience we have now with like the uh exporting of like Saudi Islam. That was not a
This
thing
was
then.
before the Saudis discovered that their country was floating on a pool of oil.
Mm,
So they didn't have the money to export Islam like they did later on.
right.
So consequently, instead of, the Saudis kind of try to force everybody into their mold, but as Mustaqim can tell you, Islam can be expressed in very different ways. The Islam in Indonesia is or was way different than what you'll find in Saudi Arabia. It's way more open and willing to, you have other things involved with it.
Hmm. Yeah. So that kind of leads us into Sufism. How did you become exposed to that? How did you become interested in Sufism specifically?
Okay, so freshman in college, um, I'm studying a lot of history. I'm very much I did my undergraduate work in anthropology, and I was interested in the anthropology of white people,
Mm,
people that had not much been done back then. Now you can find a lot of that, but I was like, how did Europe get so weird, and why did they decide that they wanted to take over the whole world?
hmm.
Um, what is it about these cultures that made them so aggressive and things like that?
Yeah.
And so I looked a lot at European history, especially the history of the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages. And I started noticing this theme that kept popping up of um, interesting injections into European culture from the Islamic world that caused often very positive changes, sometimes long lasting, sometimes short term. Um, and there were these weird people who were doing this, who were called dervishes or fakirs or Sufis. And it's like, who are these guys? So I started looking, and I was able, even back then, there were still some interesting books on the subject. You had A.J. Arbery and Nicholson, two British Islamic scholars who were both translating Rumi and that sort of thing, even back in that day. Um, and it just revealed to me this idea that there is this group that has been operating for the good of mankind in its own way for, yeah, maybe thousands of years. And they've done things like preventing massacres, getting terrible tyrants to like not wipe out cities,
Yeah.
or injecting ideas into a culture that have transformed the culture.
A
One of the
bomb
Yeah,
or
one of the great
traumatize Europe.
examples of that is the troubadour movement, which had a
Mm,
heavy Sufi influence from the Crusades. When the guys from the Crusades came back, they brought all these musicians with them. And as you know, Sufis and music tend to go together. So that's basically how.
so what took you, from that theoretical leap into the practical, like real world, hands-on participation in Sufism?
Coming to the conclusion that I couldn't understand this from the outside looking in,
Mm.
there were lots of what one of my teachers used to call Sufologists, who are mostly Brits, who study Sufism from the outside and then make judgments about it through the filter of their own culture.
Hmm.
Um, and I make fun of the Brits because they did that a lot.
They did, didn't they?
Americans are almost as bad, but not quite as bad as the Brits.
So I actually had the thought, I want to backtrack a bit. Um, so when you got involved in Islam, Was that like a formal thing? Did you formally convert, or was it
Not
like,
then, not
yeah,
then. No,
yeah,
that never came up. You know, my friend and his father never said, you should be a Muslim.
yeah.
They never
Mm-hmm.
did. It was like, hey, welcome, have something to eat.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Wow. So then,
And years later, I asked him why, and he said, there is no compulsion in religion. Famous quote from the Quran.
yep, an important one.
Yeah. So instead of telling me that I should be a Muslim, he just showed me how he lived his life. My friend's father.
Excellent. I mean, that was similar to my experience as well. I mean, no
Yeah,
one turned to me and was like, if you don't convert, you're going to hell or anything like that. It was just like, here's how we live, and these are how we show our hearts, that kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I found it
Um,
a much more pleasant experience than Christianity.
I have to admit, I feel similarly. Yeah. Um, so with that said, was there a point when you did formally convert?
Yeah, and it was when I found my first teacher. He
Your
said,
first
yeah, my
Sufi
first
teacher?
Sufi teacher.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
those tie together then.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He was like, in order to do this, you got to be a Muslim. So I'm
Hmm.
like, la ilaha illallah.
There you
That was
go.
easy.
Yeah. Yep. There's no God but God.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, which is part. It's called a shahada, which means to witness, and it's you say la ilaha illallah. Ashadu la ilaha illallah. I witness that there is no God but God.
Hmm.
Ashadu Muhammadan abduhu rasuluhu. I witness that Muhammad is the servant of God and his prophet or his messenger, however you care to
Yep.
translate that. And you say that, and boom, you're a Muslim. Say the magic words. The duck comes down, gives you 30 days of fasting during Ramadan.
So that was easy. By the time you found your teacher, you're just like, sure,
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, I was already completely comfortable with the religion.
Hmm.
And as far as religion goes, I mean, once I understood certain things about it, uh, it was much easier to take than a lot of things.
Hmm.
It didn't mean that I stopped being interested in other things.
Right. Same.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, uh, I mean, I was raised in a unique church when I was a kid, and I stayed an active member of that church uh, almost into my 40s.
Yep. So, how did you meet your first teacher?
Well, so I decided I had to find a Sufi teacher. And so I've always done this thing where I get jobs where I can make a lot of money, and then I save up that money and I live like a monk for a couple of years until I have a big chunk of money saved up, and then I go traveling. So I had been doing that. I put myself through college working as a psychiatric technician and then a psychiatric nurse, which paid really well back then, especially if you worked for the county or the state. Um, Consequently, I graduated from college without a dime's worth of debt because we could do that back then. Did you know that you could graduate from college without any debt at all?
I'm envious, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
Um, but so I would work night shift because you got a shift differential. So you got paid more. And then I would just sock that away. I would live on $50 a month. Yeah. And I lived in a place at that time where I was paying $70 a month in rent. And everything else that I was making just went into my savings account. Then I spent 11 months in the Middle East and such. I started in Egypt and looked around for Sufis there, found plenty of Sufis, didn't find anybody who I was interested in having as a teacher. Then I snuck across Israel to Jordan and up through Syria, finally ended up in Iran, which you could do back then because this was before the fall of the Shah. And so Americans were uh, much more comfortable there. And that's where I spent most of my time because this is weird. Of all the peoples that are in the quote Middle East, Iranians and Americans are probably the closest and easiest to get along with. Um, I always found Iran to be incredibly comfortable, um, incredibly warm people, really friendly. Uh, a lot of Arabs tend to have a stick up their ass because they're Arabs and nobody else is. Did I say that out loud? Damn it.
Yep.
And you don't find that with Iranians. They were great people. So I spent a lot of time there, and they had Sufi orders all over the place, and I hung out with whole bunches of them. There were a couple that I really, really liked, but the teachers, again, didn't quite speak to me. So I finally run low on money and have to come back to the States. And so I fly back to California. I'm living in the Santa Cruz Mountains at the time, at what used to be a beautiful place. Now it is a charred wasteland. The place where I used to live got burned to the ground, which is very sad.
Thanks to the recent fires, right?
Yes, thanks to the fires. They happened in what had been my backyard.
Yeah.
Um, but back then it was green and beautiful and really nice. And so I get back and I pick up a job at Santa Cruz County General Hospital in the neuropsych ward, in the locked ward, because if you're a male psychiatric nurse, you always have work, or at least you used to. And that's because sometimes it helps to have a lot of masks when you're controlling crazy people. You used to hear male staff to the front desk, meaning somebody was, doing something really crazy and you're going to have to grab them. But yeah, so I get back there and I'm a little bit bummed because I did all of this traveling and I met fine people and saw wonderful things, uh, but didn't find what I was looking for. And there was, probably still is, a free newspaper that everybody in Santa Cruz reads called Good Times. It's handed out all up and down the Pacific Garden Mall and stuff like that. And I opened it up one day, and I always read the little ads in the back because some of them were hilarious. But there was this little um, like 4-line ad that said, "Sufi teacher in the area for 2 weeks. Call for appointment." And so I read that, and first I ignored it. Then I read it again. Then I figured, what the heck? I called. Turns out he's staying half a mile from my house on the same road. And so I literally walked down to his house. He was down the hill. I was up the hill. And turned out he was my teacher. He came to America. I didn't have to go anywhere. So I studied with him for as long as he was alive.
Wow.
So
So
that's how I found my teacher, which I always find amusing.
yeah, you went all the way to Iran to find this teacher who
Was
was,
literally in my backyard.
yeah, and he was in fact Iranian himself, wasn't he?
Yes, he
Yes.
was
So,
Iranian. Yeah.
yeah.
And here's how close he was. I lived at 11747 Alba Road, and he was staying at 1000 Alba Road.
all the way around the world just to come home
Yeah,
and find your teacher. Yep.
I'm sure that if I had listened, I would have heard God laughing at me.
We can laugh. Yes. So I know that he was one of your strongest mentors,
Oh yeah,
and I know that you've had many. So I was wondering if you'd like to share, maybe, if you feel comfortable, more about him or about other powerful mentors you've had over the course of your lifetime, because I think those people have made huge contributions to your life and your teachings.
yeah. Talk about two who I considered very important. Uh, One was a fellow by the name of George Leonard. Most people don't know who he is anymore. He was actually an editor for, I think, Life magazine, but he had a really uh, interesting mind. I was first introduced to him in college. He had just written a book called Education and Ecstasy, and my anthropology teacher made it required reading for the class. And it was brilliant. It had thoughts that I never knew that anybody could think in it at the time with my young mind. And so consequently, I followed him. Everything that he wrote, I would get my hands on it the moment that it came out, and which was much harder back then because there was no such thing as the internet. We
And
actually had
things
these things
didn't.
called bookstores that had
Wow. So
physical books. Yeah.
stuff didn't fall off the digital truck back then?
Nope. Um, and he wrote some really good books. The Transformation, The Ultimate Athlete, The Silent Pulse. All of these were great books, and each one of them changed me a lot. And then finally, probably 6 years after I read his first book, I got to meet him in person, and it was like, wow. Yeah. So every chance I got, I would hang out with him. And he lived in Northern California. He actually was one of the co-founders of Aikido of Tamalpais, because that was his thing. Is he was an Aikidoka, and I forget what his rank was, but it was up there. And he taught pretty much literally till the day he died, and he used that as uh, a metaphor for life, as it were. He did a lot of interesting things at Esalen that you could go to if you had enough money to go to Esalen. So he was very important to me and helped form my thoughts. But probably in the non-Sufi world, uh, the most significant mentor I had was Dr. Peter Kostenbaum, PhD. He was my philosophy professor. And I met him. He was teaching at San Jose State when I was living up in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And my girlfriend at the time was studying with him. And he said, "You have to meet this guy." And I'm like, "I don't want to meet this guy." I should mention that at this time I was probably 22 and barely civilized. I knew how to eat with utensils, sort of, but I would still growl at you if you got too close to my food. Uh, but she talked me into coming and meeting him, and we actually met in his office, and we talked for 3.5 hours.
So you guys really connected.
We really connected, and he got me to go back to college. I went to his institute, spent 5 years there working on my PhD, um, and I credit him with teaching me how to think,
Mm.
amongst other things.
And he's
Um,
written some books as well,
oh
right?
yeah, he's written many books, some of which freak people out. Uh, his biggest book when I first met him was called The Vitality of Death. And lots of people didn't want to read that. But then he wrote a book called The New Image of the Person, which was sort of his opus magnum. And all of us who were his private students at his institute worked on it with him. We were his laboratory. So I got to know that book inside and out, forward and backwards. And yeah, it's an amazing work. It's hard to find. A copy will run you about $100 and $120 new these days. I have two copies. But yeah, he and I think, had something of a special connection because all of his other students were psychologists. I was the only pure philosophy person in the school. I didn't care about psychology because I knew too many psychiatrists. So psychology was like, eh.
Yeah, did the psychiatric nursing come later then?
No, this was, I was doing psychiatric nursing when I was doing this.
Yeah.
That's why I have no respect for psychologists.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm being slightly facetious there because there are some really good psychologists out there.
Right.
They just don't work for the county.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear you there. Yeah. I think it's gotten better now, but
I think so too.
yeah. Um, so you have had a lot of teachers in your lifetime,
Yes.
and so it's fascinating that you kind of stumbled into becoming a teacher yourself. How and why did that happen?
Okay. So that's sort of a two-part question.
I suppose it is. Yeah. So take it
So
apart.
there are a couple of things that I teach.
Mhm.
One of which is that I still, even to this day, in my late old age, I still teach martial arts, and that was the first thing that I became a teacher in. When I was 21, my teacher, my friend's father, gave me a piece of paper. It was notebook paper, the kind with the blue lines. And on it, he wrote my name and everything, said, he's learned this martial art that I taught him. He's not bad at it. He can teach it. It's okay. And he signed it. I still have it. It's tucked away safely. It's kind of old and ragged now. It's been following me around for 50 some odd years. But it took me another 5 years to be willing to teach anything
Why was that?
because I was unsure of myself. I was
Yeah,
young, you know.
I
I knew
relate
I
to
could
that.
do it, but I wasn't sure that I could teach it.
Hmm.
As it
And we,
turns out, I'm a natural teacher. I didn't know that at the time because I hadn't had enough experience doing it. But teaching is like it is easier for me to teach a class than it is to fall out of bed. It has always come very easy to me.
yeah,
But, I was young back then. I was unsure of myself. It's like, can I really teach this? Do I deserve to teach it? Um, and the answer is, yeah, I guess so. I've trained some really good people over the years. So there was that. And then there was uh, my second Sufi teacher. So there's a big gap between first and second Sufi teacher. My second Sufi teacher, after I was with him for 10 or 12 years, he gave me a piece of paper too. They're always giving me these pieces of paper. This one is prettier. And it says Ijaza, permission to teach. And it was both ordaining me as a cleric within the order, um, so that I have the authority to marry people and bury people and talk to people in prison and do pastoral counseling and all of that kind of stuff, which you got to have here in the States, and gave me permission to teach. So that's how those happen. And he used to send me out on assignments all the time. Yeah.
Mm.
He would take me with him someplace like where Harvard. He took me with him when we went to Harvard. We taught at Harvard. Not a full class, just lecturing, but still, I get to say that. I said something that wasn't entirely stupid at Harvard University.
Putting that ijaza to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He sent me to Tanzania to spend a year teaching. So he would just he would force it on me
How did he force it on you?
because he would say, you need to do this. And, you can't say no.
Mm. Yep.
So that's kind of how.
We have a question from
Mustaqim
Mr.
wants to know why Tanzania, because
Yeah.
we had a large group of people there who had no guidance other than when Sheikh went to Tanzania. So that's why. And so I spent a year hanging out there. I think I had a way more fun being there than they had having me there.
Wow. Okay. So, why do you think you became a teacher? I know this is kind of a weird question to answer for yourself, but give it a try.
I have a vocation for it.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm really good at it.
Hmm.
Um, in martial arts, you look at two things when somebody says, "Oh, I'm a teacher." The first thing you look at is, can they do it? In martial arts, can they fight?
Hmm.
Can they get on the floor with somebody and mix it up, not with uh, prearranged sets and all of that kind of stuff, but actual free flow, you know? And the second thing you look at is, can they teach somebody else to do it? Can they impart that knowledge to others? And unless a martial arts teacher can do both of those things, they're not going to be a good teacher. I've known martial artists who were phenomenal fighters. I mean, just really good in the ring, in the circle, in the octagon, whatever you got. They could not teach a kid how to tie his shoes for the life of them.
Yeah, we have mentioned in talks before about how, being able to do an art is a different skill set from being able to teach an art.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to be a teacher, you have to do both. You have to be able to demonstrate that you can do it. You don't have to be the best at it, even. I mean, on his best day, Customato could have never beaten Mike Tyson, but he coached Mike Tyson to the world championship, to the heavyweight championship of the world. But in his day, he could do it.
And that's the thing too. You take a lot of wisdom with you as you progress in your teaching, even if your skills in terms of, being able to keep up with the young people aren't as robust as they might have been at one point. And
Yeah. Well, as you get older, you learn to cheat more.
that's, yeah, that makes perfect sense. All right. So I have one final question for you, and then we can open it up to everyone. What is one of the most important spiritual lessons you've learned since you started teaching?
If you think you've got there, you're wrong.
Mm.
There is no end to the path. There is no done. There are people who say, "Oh, I'm done." You're not done as long as you're breathing. If you have stopped breathing for at least 15 minutes, you're probably done. Other than that, you're not done.
So, have you hit that wall before where
Oh, yeah,
you
when I was
caught
younger,
yourself? Yeah.
you know, and realized that young and stupid are synonyms. Um, yeah, when I was younger, I think, oh, I've got it. Until the universe arranged itself in such a way as to show me that, in fact, I had not gotten it, that there was a lot more. So this is a profound thing for me. And I don't think I figured out until I was in my 30s, but it was like, oh, you're never done. Don't expect to be done. Expect
Yeah.
the journey to be a process for as long as you're breathing. And that's
What was
something that I also learned from my elders. I watched them, and the teachers that I had that were real teachers never stopped learning, improving, refining what they had. And I tried to not do that either.
right? Yeah.
And fortunately, I have people who keep me on my toes, Noor.
Yeah. All right. So, Mr. Keem asks, done is not the same as graduated.
No, graduated. Graduated is literally you just reached the point. It's like in Silat, which is one of the martial arts that I got deeply into. You were either a student or you were a finished student. A finished student could be said to have graduated because they've learned the entire system. And back in the day, Silat systems didn't keep adding new stuff constantly. It was like you had the system. You did Chamande. You had 35 Jurus, 8 Lankas, 3 weapons, and that was it. You had a few other little things, but that was the entire body of knowledge. And when you learned it to your teacher's satisfaction, you were finished. You graduated. Doesn't mean that you don't spend the rest of your life improving your skills, but that's it. Done is a different thing. It's like, oh, I've reached enlightenment. No, you haven't reached enlightenment. There is no such thing as reaching enlightenment. In this moment, you're either awake or you're not. And if all of your moments are awake, you're doing really good. As far as I can tell, with everybody, including the deepest, most profound teachers I have ever known, not all of their moments are awake. If nothing else, they have to have deep sleep sometime. The question is, when they're in the world, what are they doing?
Okay. So, Mr. Keem then asks, uh, then is there any chance that the graduated students become asleep again?
There's a great chance up until a certain point. I think that there is a point that you reach where you have the momentum of being awake, and it becomes easier and easier to stay awake. But I think at any moment you can dive back into uh, samsara if you want to. I mean, first of all, you have to realize that samsara, uh, or living in nafsalamara, or any of these other fancy phrases that we use, is a process that is not real. You just pretend that you are stuck in this illusionary thing. And so, yes, you can pop out and then pop back in. And I suspect that up until a certain point, that that's always going to be a possibility. And I've tested this. As my last teacher would tell you, I have a superpower. My superpower is the ability to piss anybody off. This is very useful because when I have met people who they came off to me as being these great enlightened guys. Um, and I didn't buy it, I would see how angry they could get. I would see if I could kind of get them into a completely reactionary state. And the answer is yes.
Some more easily than others, I'm imagining.
Some more easily than others.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that one should ever let one's guard down and assume that you're there.
Hmm. I agree with you. Yeah.
And that makes me different than a whole lot of teachers out there who talk about, oh, you have this permanent state of non-dual awareness. And we don't know that it's permanent. All we know is that they're either in it at this moment or they're not.
Hmm. Yep.
Of course, that doesn't count for me.
Oh no,
No.
you excluded, right?
Yeah. I almost kept a straight face on that.
So, do we have any other questions? I'd love to open the floor now, and anyone can unmute or type in. I say just go for it. How about you, Nancy? You got any questions for
Well, here's
Mushtaq?
a small one, which
Sure.
is oh, did you choose your name? What was involved in that?
Okay, so my name, the one that I use, Mushtaq, comes from when I was in Iran. One of the things that I was doing there was studying music. And the instrument that I really liked is called the setar. It's a small 3-stringed long necked lute. Beautiful instrument. It's designed to be played in intimate settings. And it happens that there was this crazy Sufi in the 19th century whose name was Mushtaq Ali Shah. Um, and he was a great setar player. As a matter of fact, he was the guy who came up with doubling the course on the low string. So you have the highest string is one string, the middle string is one string, and the lowest string is a low string and the octave of that string. It just gave the instrument that much more interesting texture. And so that's actually called the Mushtaq string.
Hmm.
So anyway, my fellow students, because this guy was completely nuts, great musician, completely out of his mind. He was what they call madzub, God intoxicated. And he was actually murdered by mullahs in front of a mosque for singing love songs to God. Uh, but my fellow students decided that I was more than a little crazy, so they started calling me Mushtaq, and it stuck. But it's not the name that my teacher gave me, that my sheikh has given me, which is um, different, and I don't usually use that publicly. So Mushtaq is my pen name,
Yep.
and I've used it for longer than I use my white people's name.
And one more. You talked about your ability to make people angry. Have you run into anybody else who's tried that with you?
Oh yeah, hundreds of times, thousands of times. I mean, we have the internet.
Well, have they succeeded?
Usually not, not in a long time. You know, one of the things that my sheikh did was early on in the internet, he ordered me to create a forum for Sufism. And it was back on, at the time it was called One List, and it was eventually bought by Yahoo and everything. It was the longest running email list on Sufism out there. It ran for like 8 years. And in that 8 years, I learned to deal with every kind of troll you could possibly think of. And it basically taught me how to just let all of that stuff go through, deal with them as they need to be dealt with. And then we had things like Facebook where the number of Jewish people who have gone after me because I have a Muslim name, I've lost count.
Oh, really? I didn't know about that.
Oh yeah, that was back in the day.
Yeah.
And then various political types who want to run their agenda rather than something else. You know, and so now, thanks to my teacher's wisdom, that stuff is like water off a duck's back. It doesn't even remotely bother me. It takes a lot to get me angry these days. It's not impossible by any means, but it takes a lot.
Thanks, Nancy. Those were good
Welcome.
questions. All right. So this is everyone's opportunity to ask Mushtaq
Ask me
pretty much
anything.
anything. Yeah. So
I might not answer, but you're welcome to ask.
how about you, Pelan? What's on your mind?
I mean, the first question that popped into my head because we've been doing Bagua is, how did you end up in Indonesia?
Well, my first teacher, he was from the south of the Philippines, an area called Mindanao, which is just above Indonesia. And he said, our art originally came from down in Indonesia. And so if you ever get a chance to study in Indonesian Silat, you should do it. And so I went to Indonesia to study Silat. And that's how I ended up there. And one of the schools I went to was in Bogor. And they were actually, the founder of that school was ethnic Chinese. And what he taught was a combination of Chinese Kuntao and Indonesian Silat that he had sort of synthesized when he was a young fellow. And the school is still around. I mean, he's been dead for 30 years, but the school is still going strong.
Yeah, it is. I've seen those videos too.
Yeah.
Of the school grounds and such. It seems pretty beautiful there.
Yeah, Bogor is a very pretty city.
Mm.
Or at least it was when I was there.
Yeah.
Mustaqim, is Bogor still beautiful?
Yes, I think so. It's
Good.
a little bit hot now. So many, so many cars now.
Yeah.
How about you, Zainab? You got any thoughts or questions you want to share with Mushtaq?
I was just thinking, did you ever come? You said you came to Australia once.
Yes, my teacher sent me there.
And what?
A month in Melbourne, me and one other fellow, a fellow student, working with my teacher's students there and doing talks and lectures and also having a lot of fun. So yeah, like I said, my sheikh would send me to all manner of wild and crazy places.
When was that?
2002.
Okay.
And I liked Australia. Australia is nice. Australian people are fun. A little crazy, but fun.
So there were interested people here, like as in interested in
Oh yeah,
your teaching.
yeah, yeah. There was a big Sufi group. Most of them were they referred to themselves as Cape Malay. Do you know about the Cape Malay community?
No.
So
No.
they're actually Indonesian. And when the Dutch were running South Africa, they brought Indonesian slaves over to work. And those folks formed a community and were referred to as Cape Malay because they lived down in the Cape of South Africa. And a lot of them migrated to Australia because South Africa for a long time was not a fun place to live unless you were white.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sitting there, and our main host there was a member of this community, and he takes me over to his family's house, me and Ibrahim, my partner who I'm traveling with, and they're all talking Bahasa Indonesia. You know, it's like, what? And so I pull out my Indonesian and I dust it off and join in the conversation. And they have a weird dialect, and it has a bunch of Afrikaans in it. But yeah, that was a big hit with them. They thought that was the coolest thing since sliced bread, that somebody could actually speak their language in Australia, even if I wasn't from there.
The world is so small.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
but they had the same feel as Indonesians in Indonesia. Yeah, it was the same culture, just transplanted someplace else. So, you know, you could see that a lot of them had African blood, but the culture was definitely Indonesian. You know, you things happen like this guy walks in and he's carrying his son, and he walks over and says, "Here, say hello to your uncle," and drops the kid in my lap. Things like that.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah. Wow. Very cool. Omar, do you have any questions or thoughts for Mushtaq?
Yeah, I do. Um, one of them, I don't know if we have time for tonight to answer it, but what I've heard tonight was kind of mostly your exterior journey. What was missing from it, was the names of your teachers. I'm not sure if that's some reason that you're not disclosing.
Yeah, because it's nobody's business.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I guess what I'm really interested in is the interior journey. What was your spiritual journey like? What were you looking for? What kind of issues did you run into? How did you resolve them? What insights did you gain? I mean, it's that stuff that would probably interest me, especially now. I appreciate the exterior journey, but I'd kind of like to hear the interior journey sometime. When I said we probably don't have time for it, it's 7:43. So,
Yeah, I can give a very, very brief synopsis. My interior journey has always revolved around what is true and am I awake? Those two questions. I mean, I can tell you that I invented meditation in the 5th grade. I mean, other people had invented it before, but I invented it because I hated my 5th grade teacher. And my 5th grade teacher said, "You can't stop thinking." And so I decided that I must make a liar out of him. So I would sit for hours and practice not thinking. I learned how to cease the twistings and turnings of my thoughts by sheer effort of will. And the side effect of that was that the world became a very interesting place when my mind became quiet. And I never told my teacher, "Hey, you're wrong. I can stop thinking." because I had no way to prove it. But I found that the ability to not think, which is to not chatter in my mind, to be a very useful one. So there were things like that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the interior journey, but most of it involves that. How do I know what is true? Everybody's telling me a story. What do I know is true? I mean, I heard the Christian story early on, you know, and you got to do what we say and say the magic words, or you're going to go to hell, and God's going to burn you up forever. And you know, I'm looking at that going, how do I know that's true? There's a lot that you could doubt there. You know, and that got me into, you know, reading the philosophers and their various answers to that, and the various spiritual teachers. I mean, I left out large chunks of my life, you know, a year in India and that sort of thing, where I applied myself to this sort of thing, breaking down the ego constructs to see what was underneath them. But yeah, that is a conversation that would probably take several hours. You always ask the good questions right at the end when we have to quit.
You only stopped talking about 10 minutes ago. What do you want, right?
You,
Well, I would love to have a session on that, on just that topic, or session or two, you know? Because I mean, for example, I mean, how the hell did you decide you were not awake, that you needed to find out how to be awake?
by lucid dreaming.
Ah, how's that? Speak more.
Early on, I developed a good skill at lucid dreaming. And one day the question occurred to me, came into my common presence, as Mr. G would say. If I'm asleep in my dream and then I wake up, how do I know that I'm awake now? That's how the question emerged. That wasn't even from a spiritual teacher. This is a question I figured out before I had any big spiritual teachers.
Mm.
And so that's where I got my sneaky trick of asking people, are you awake or asleep right now? Because you have to wake up to answer the question. And that was one of my big discoveries, is if I ask myself that, I'm awake at least for a moment.
And this was something you discovered in 5th grade, was it? Or
that was a little bit later. The meditation part was in 5th grade.
Okay.
And that was only because I hated my 5th grade teacher with a passion and wanted to prove him wrong at every point.
And
Trouble.
yeah, I mean, obviously we could continue on this track, and I'd love to continue on this track sometime. But I'm also curious, like you said, you belonged to some kind of a unique church before you left New Mexico. And I wonder what that influence on you was like, and whether that played any role in this search for what's true, what's not true, you know, and maybe even for this awakening thing.
Well, the unique church is one that most people can't get into. And the only reason that I could get into it is because a lot of my family is Native American. And the answer is yes. It definitely helped put me on that path. And publicly, I don't want to say a lot about that, because these people are still out there, and the last thing they need is a bunch of folks trying to look them up and find enlightenment with them.
Yeah.
Ask me in private sometime after the cameras are off and we can talk about that. But I don't want to say, oh, you can find out incredible truths if you go and hang out with these people, because they don't need you to come and hang out with them, you in the general sense.
Right, I understand.
Yeah, it's respect for things like that is really important. So.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yep. But I understand you're asking.
Yeah, and I am happy to tell you. I'm just not happy to tell the world.
Mm. Yep.
Mm.
Thanks, Omar. I want to give Cherie a chance to offer any thoughts or questions. No? Okay. Cool. All right.
Dang,
So,
all that talking and I never caught her interest.
Well, doesn't mean she's not interested.
I
It
know,
just
I'm
means
giving
she's
her a hard
just-
time.
Yeah.
I get to give her a hard time.
Yes. Sure. Yay.
And where the hell did Gurdjieff come into this picture?
Gurdjieff came into the picture in 1967. I am wandering down Haight Street, and there's a bookstore.
This is in where
San
for people
Francisco.
who don't know. Yeah.
Did I mention that I was a hippie?
Not yet. Not in this
Hippie.
conversation. Yeah.
So 1967, Haight-Ashbury District, Haight Street. So the Diggers, if you know who they are, they had a free store, and they had books in the store. And I have found a couple of really good books in that store, a few. One of which was Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous. And I looked at it, cool, I like the miraculous. So I grabbed the book. And that's how I started being interested in Gurdjieff, because he was talking shit that nobody else was talking. And it fell into my interest in Sufism.
Because there are dovetails.
There's
there.
a lot of dovetails.
And I guess I'd love to hear the details of those dovetails. Now, for example, I mean, you say one of the things that you're interested was, are you awake or not, you know? And it sounds like at a very early age, you discovered a trick to make sure that you were awake when you asked yourself, I'm awake. But
Yeah.
obviously you went on in search for something more than that.
The same take, you know, that was one of the things that caught my attention was, you know, his, both he and Muhammad, the prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and all like that, have the same take, which is man is asleep. You know, Gurdjieff goes so far as to say, and I'm paraphrasing, that man is asleep and he's dreaming and he's having nightmares. And that jived with my own experience. Early on, I figured out that most people were acting from some sort of stimulus response program in their heads. And that was very, very interesting to watch people just run programs, which is something that I've been doing since I was fairly young. My grandfather, my father's father, taught me how to track when I was a kid. And I think that I have somehow turned that into mental tracking. I track people's minds and the impressions that they leave behind them. And one of the things that I see over and over again is people do the same thing over and over and over. Even when they get different stimuli, they do the same thing. Then, of course, I have to ask myself, am I doing the same thing over and over and over? And of course, the answer is, well, damn it, yes. How do I stop that?
Is that a different question for you than am I awake or not?
No, because it goes into that. You can only do different things than your programming if you're awake.
Okay, so that brings me back to that. And again, stop me anytime that, you know, somebody else needs to get in, you know, because I don't want to hog this line of questioning.
I know she probably has to run off pretty quick, so.
Right. Well, let me just stop right there then, you know, because I know I would love to continue this sometime, but I think there's a lot more. For example, I mean, it seems to me that, you know, you are on this awake quest, I think not just to help other people, but also to help yourself. And presumably at a fairly young age, you discovered that you could ask yourself, am I awake? And you'd be awake. And so I'm curious about what drove you.
As I like to say, people who wake up help other people to wake up so that they'll have somebody to not have to talk to.
It does, yeah, it's like an intertwined mission and they build upon each other.
Yeah, but the question is, what drove you on to continue on your path with all these Sufi teachers and so forth? Was it to strengthen your own awakeness in some sense, or was it primarily to help others?
You know, there might have been some sort of trying to fool myself into thinking that I was doing it for somebody else at first, but I think my teachers disabused me of that thought early on, because you can't heal somebody of a disease that you have yourself.
Right.
So clean up your own act, then you can help somebody else.
So obviously there was still work left to do even after your lucid dreaming thing. You realize that you could just say, hey, am I awake or not? And you'd be awake.
Like I said, you have work to do until you have not needed to take a breath for at least 15,
Right. And
preferably a half an hour.
And can you set a date for when we're going to have that discussion and follow that line of interior?
We can only have that discussion hypothetically, and by the time I have any, well, I died once, but it was pretty unimpressive, so there's not a lot I can say about it. But
I want your interior story before your death. I'll talk to you on the other side if there is one after your death, because I'll probably get there before you do. So, but
who knows? We might live forever, and then everybody else can die.
There you go. There you go. Anyway, I will shut up for the night. Thank you.
Yeah, it's getting a little bit late. We should probably wrap this up.
Yeah, but I think some really great questions have been asked, and I hope that if you guys have some after we wrap up, feel free to message Mushtaq. Yep.
Yeah, for the people who are here, who were all my friends, I will be happy to talk about things that I'm not comfortable about talking about in public. Mm-hmm. And so there you have it.
Yep. Thank you, Mushtaq.
All right.
Up for this tonight.
So I'm going to end the recording and say good night to everybody.
Waving.
Wait a second. Let me do a quick.
You want to do the full screen thing?
Yeah, the full screen galaxy. Bye, folks.
Hey, all right. There you go.
Yeah.
Awesome.